Hello and welcome to an eBiology Teacher Podcast. I'm Mr. Doc, and I have a really eerie sensation that I'm being watched. All right. Obviously, we're talking about organ systems today. This is my friend who has no name because he doesn't have a lot of things and a lot of stuff. So today we're going to be looking at organ systems sort of as an overview. Now, you've got a whole lecture series coming up where we talk about a variety of different organ systems, more in particular. But today we're going to kind of do an overview. We're going to look at all of them and see what's going on in them. So let's go ahead and get started with sort of identifying what it is that we're going to learn today. All right. We're going to start with making sure that we have a clear understanding of the main purpose of all the major body systems. So we're going to be able to identify not only what the body systems are, but also what they do. Additionally, we're going to identify which organs make up which body systems. And I'm going to go ahead and give you some fair warning ahead of time. Sometimes organs fall into more than one category because the human body isn't just a whole bunch of little parts that just do their own thing. There are a whole bunch of little parts that integrate together to do a much bigger purpose. Finally, we're going to compare and contrast the general anatomical relationship of the major organs. In other words, we're going to try to get a pretty good feel for what the body looks like both inside and out. So we need to be able to find these things once we're looking for them. So let's go ahead and move on to the major organ systems that we're going to be talking about. When we say the word organ system, what we really mean is a series of organs that work together for a common purpose. That doesn't mean that they can't have multiple purposes or that they can't play a role in other systems. But an organ system generally is defined by the organs that make it up and the purpose that it does. Now, each organ system is made up of organs that are made up of specific tissues. And as you probably have no doubt learned in this class already, the structure of something will determine the job that it does. In other words, shape determines function. So even the cells that make up a system are unique to that system. Because remember, all the way back at the beginning when we were talking about the cell theory, cells are the basic unit of both structure and function. Now, what do I really mean by that? Well, what I mean is the shape of the cells that make up an organ are what allow that organ to do what it does. Okay? Your stomach doesn't churn and produce acid. The cells that make up your stomach allow the stomach to contract, and they do have acid-producing mechanisms in them. So the cells that make up your stomach are what allow your stomach to do what it does. If your stomach doesn't do what it does, it's generally because the cells that make up your stomach are broken. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. All right? Finally, each tissue, again, is made up of specialized cells that are unique to that system. And there's a process called histology where we could basically look at cells and tell where in the body they came from. The major organ systems that we're going to consider are the skeletal system, the muscular system, the integumentary system, the circulatory system, respiratory, digestive, excretory, nervous, endocrine, and the reproductive system. The reproductive system being the odd one out here because there are actually two different versions of it. You probably know what I'm talking about already. Now, if you are in my class, the bolded ones are the ones that we're actually going to dissect using the fetal pig. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing an analogous dissection. What I mean by analogous dissection is that we're going to be using the fetal pig as sort of a model, a stand-in for the human body so that we can get a better understanding of how our bodies work. And the fetal pig is a surprisingly similar, surprisingly analogous organism where when we look at that, we can really see how we work. Okay, so unless you're willing to dissect, somebody, which I can't imagine anybody volunteering for that job, we're going to use the fetal pig as sort of a stand-in. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take each one of these systems one by one. We're going to talk about its major function and the pieces that make it up. So let's start with the skeletal system. Now, the skeletal system has the job of providing structure for the organism. It basically is the frame on which everything is built. The components that make up the skeletal system are bones, cartilage, and ligament. ligaments are the connective tissue that connect bone to bone. All right, and that's important because sometimes we think about, oh, well, I have a tendon or a ligament. A ligament's specific job is to hold the bones together, bone to bone. All right, and that's what a ligament does. The cartilage basically serves as sort of a barrier between rubbing bones. Now, I mean, you can imagine if you rub two sticks together, you get fire, right? That's pretty cool. Well, you don't want sticks to rub together in your legs because that's a place you don't want fire, right? So the cartilage basically adds as the lubricant between muscle or between bones to prevent them from basically damaging. And as a matter of fact, there's a condition called arthritis where the cartilage basically wears away, and we have a lot of pain in our joints because there's not enough cartilage to keep it nice and smooth and even. All right. Now, I do want to show you something real quick, and that is a picture of what you would commonly see as part of the skeletal system. That's this thing right over here. And you can see there are hundreds of bones in the human body. Each of them articulate. Which means that they move with another one. They have a joint or an articulation point. And that allows them to sort of bend and move and gives us movement. Unfortunately, bones can't move on their own. They have to have something to move them, which is where our next system comes into play. Our next system is the muscular system. The muscular system's job is to provide movement for the organism as well as provide movement of materials within the organism, meaning that the organism needs stuff to move around in it, and muscles help us do that. Now, muscles are obviously the most common part of the muscular system, but also muscles have to be attached either to other muscles or to the bones that they're moving in order to work. So a tendon is a connective tissue that connects muscle to muscle or muscle to bone. All right, muscle to muscle or muscle to bone. And that's a pretty simple way of looking at it. Oh, I'm coming back to you. There I am. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at a muscular system chart so you can get a better idea of what that looks like. And there are also hundreds of muscles in the human body. Now, muscles tend to exist in a pair. We have a protagonist and an antagonist. That allows our muscles to move in both directions. So let's think about our bicep and our tricep. When we flex our bicep, we cause this part of our body to move up, okay? So the bicep is the protagonist. But what keeps our arm from going right and back in our face is because there's another muscle that's providing stabilization on the other side. That would be our tricep on the back of our arm. So that is providing us that tension. So if I'm pushing, I'm trying to pull up, but I'm keeping it from moving, I'm working both my bicep and my tricep because they both play a very important role and making sure that our body moves properly. Now, I want to go back to something that was said in the chart or in the slide earlier, and that is it not only provides movement for our body, which is what we generally think of when we think of muscular system, but it also provides movement of materials inside the body, which means that your heart, while we may think that's a circulatory system, which we haven't talked about yet, you're right, but it also provides movement of materials inside the body. It pushes blood throughout the body. So it's a muscle and is therefore part of the muscular system as well. When you eat food, it doesn't just fall through you. It has to be pushed, and it has to be pushed by muscle. So the parts that make up your alimentary canal or your digestive tract are made out of muscles. Your stomach churns food. It's got to move. What's it made out of? You guessed it, muscles. All right, so let's go back to our next system, and we're going to talk about the integumentary system. Now, the integumentary system is a fancy way of talking about the system that provides a barrier for the outside of the organism from the world itself, and it really is a protective system. And there are some things in the integumentary system you may not think about. Obviously, the skin, which is the largest organ of the body, is probably what we think of when we think about the integumentary system. But hair and nails, horns, and the like are all part of the integumentary system as well, because they provide for protection from the outside world, right? Now, if we think about that, the integumentary system, obviously, skin is a big part of that, and that's something that we would certainly consider. But we also have to think about the hair on our head is a protective mechanism. The hair inside our nose, nose hair, actually prevents stuff from going up into our nose. It catches stuff and provides you guessed it, an external barrier from the outside. So hair is part of that. Nails can actually protect us. We can use them as defense mechanisms, horns, right? So these are all things that are part of our external defenses from the outside world. And the world's a pretty hairy place, no pun intended. So hair, nose, or skin, horns, nails, they're all part of the integumentary system, and they have a pretty important job. All right. Next up on our hit list is the circulatory system. Now this is the first internal visceral system, and the word visceral really talks about organs. It talks about the squishy stuff on the inside. The whole point of the circulatory system is act as a transport service for the cells of the body, delivering oxygen and food and taking away waste. So the circulatory system has a variety of functions, but ultimately its job is to provide oxygen and take away waste. Of course, the heart is probably the single most common part of the circulatory system because that's what we think of the most. But the blood and the blood vessels also make up that system. Now, it is important to note that the circulatory system also includes the lymphatic system, which we won't talk about in great detail here, but the lymphatic system is basically our body's fluid regulation system. Now, I do want to go back to the idea of tissues, okay? Tissue is a group of similar cells that work together to do a certain function. So the question becomes, is blood a tissue? Well, under the technical definition of a tissue, sure. Blood is made out of similar cells that does a particular job. It's a liquid, but your blood is a biological tissue because it's similar cells that do a particular job. Now, in our model here, we're going to call him Enrique. Enrique's heart is here, okay? It's right in the center of the chest, and of course the chest plate has been removed. And then we have veins and arteries that are moving blood around the body. Now, we're going to talk about this in our circulatory system lecture, but arteries move blood away from the heart, veins move blood toward the heart. So these blue veins have actually taken blood that's already delivered its nutrients, and it's coming back to the heart so that it can get more food and more oxygen to deliver to the rest of the body. The red in this diagram are arteries, and these are the ones that are leaving the heart. This blood, in this particular instance, that blood has been enriched with oxygen and it's being delivered to the rest of the body. And again, that's its job. But the heart is right here, and that's really the central pump that provides movement. And again, heart's a muscle, so it is part of the muscular system as well, but is the central organ in the circulatory system. All right, moving on to our next system, that is the respiratory system. The job here is to exchange gases with the outside world, more specifically with the circulatory system. Because we mentioned earlier, the circulatory system's job is to deliver oxygen to the cells of the body and to take away waste. Well, we have to be able to get that oxygen into the circulatory system in the first place. That job falls to the respiratory system. The components here are the lungs, the nose, and the diaphragm. Now, I'm going to show you the diaphragm here in a second because it does become very, very important. And we're going to talk about that more in some detail later. But the nose, the mouth, those are entryways. And then the lungs are obviously what we think of when we think about the respiratory system. Now, let's take a look here at Enrique. All right, these are our lungs here. They're on either side of the heart, right? And they are superficial to the heart. So they basically create a cage for the heart, and they would be covered by ribs, okay? Now, the idea here is, cough up a lung. Here we go. The lung's job is to interact with the atmosphere outside. This is going to blow your mind a little bit. Your respiratory system actually acts like an exterior system because it integrates or it reacts with the outside world, right? Your circulatory system is pretty closed. It only interacts with the blood vessels in your lungs, right? But the respiratory system has to get stuff from the outside inside. So it's really open to the outside. It's not strictly speaking an internal system. But what happens here is we're going to breathe in oxygen, okay? It's going to go down our trachea. It's going to enter into the lungs. It's going to exchange the oxygen with carbon dioxide in our lungs, and then that blood's going to go to the heart, and then the heart's going to do its job of circulating that blood by delivering the oxygen. But when the blood's up there, it's going to take the oxygen, put it in the cells, and it's going to take the waste, which we produce carbon dioxide from cellular respiration. It's going to pick it up, it's going to bring it back to the lungs, and then we're going to breathe that out. And that's the job of the respiratory system. And again, we're going to go over these systems in more detail in individual lectures, but I want to give you sort of an overview now. Now we're moving on to the digestive system. Oh, before we do that, I want to talk about the diaphragm. The diaphragm is actually a piece of muscle here. You can see it on the bottom of the lung, because the lungs are not made out of muscle, but air doesn't just go in. So what happens when we breathe is the diaphragm has to contract, and it pulls the lungs down. When it does that, these open spaces in the lungs fill with air. The only source of air, the outside. So when we breathe, we contract the muscle. The muscle creates space, and the space gets filled with the air outside. All right, and we'll talk about that more when we get into the respiratory system specifically. Now let's talk about the digestive system. The digestive system's job is to both physically and chemically break down food for the body's use. Now, that seems like an easy job, except you've got to realize that food has to be broken down into pretty tiny little pieces. Okay, because we got to get it into the cells, and as you well know from our previous unit on cell transport, food can't be in huge chunks. I mean, the cell really can't take in a piece of food that's bigger than the cell itself. So we're talking about breaking this food down into really, really tiny pieces. That takes both chemical and physical digestion. So teeth are part of the digestive system because they rip food apart. Your tongue helps form the food into a shape that's easy to swallow. Your esophagus leads the food down to the stomach, where it can be chemically digested. The liver and gallbladder actually provide chemicals that help further digest. The small intestine continues the digestive process and also absorbs the nutrients. So the small intestines are surrounded by blood vessels, and the nutrients get into the blood that way. And then the large intestine basically reclaims water and allows us to produce the waste. Of course, there are other parts of the digestive system that are a little less pretty, and we'll talk about those when we get specifically into the digestive system. But Enrique here is going to show us where his digestive system is. And to do that, we're going to have to remove the lungs and the heart itself. Right? So now we've got this esophagus, and it's this thing here. So it started here. It's going to work its way all the way down. And then this thing right here is going to be the liver. Hold on a second. Let's give Enrique a little height so we can see him. Here we go. All right. So the liver's here. The food's going to go into the stomach, right? And then it's going to end up in the small intestine, which is stuff here. And then it's going to go to the large intestine around here. And then the large intestine is where it ends, and then you know where it comes out later. Okay? So we don't have to talk about that. All right, so that's the digestive system sort of as an overview. Now, we're going to talk about the excretory system. The excretory system is the part where we get rid of stuff. So the whole point of the excretory system is to get rid of the body's waste products that we don't want in the body. All right, and obviously there are a couple of different things that do that. Kidneys, of course, the bladder, so we think about the urinary system. But keep in mind, the anus is part of the excretory system because that's where solid waste leaves. Another thing that we don't typically think of when we think of the excretory system is the lungs. Yes, the lungs, because if you think back to what we said earlier, carbon dioxide is a byproduct of cellular respiration. It's waste, and it leaves by getting from the blood to our lungs and from our lungs out. Finally, we have the skin. The skin helps us excrete water, salt, small amounts of nitrogenous wastes that are dissolved in sweat. So yeah, our excretory system includes skin, lungs, and even the anus, right? And even, of course, the kidneys we generally think about. This is a good point to remind you that some organs have multiple functions and therefore can belong to multiple systems. So not only does our skin protect us from the outside world, but it also helps us get rid of waste. All right, so talk about the excretory system. We're going to have to take some stuff out here, okay? Stomach. Intestines. This is all called viscera, by the way, all these gushy. Okay, so our kidneys are here, okay? And basically what happens is we have blood coming to them. The blood is filtered, so all that waste that we get, the solid waste or the liquid waste, gets filtered out here. And then it goes through the ureters to the bladder, okay? And the bladder, which I took out, oh no. All right, no, the bladder's here. Here it is. You really can't see it in this diagram, but oh, Enrique is a she-rique, and she's pregnant. Okay, anyway, we have the bladder, right? And the bladder will actually hold the urine from the kidneys until it's time to get rid of it. All right, made a mess. All right, let's move on. Move on to the nervous system. The nervous system's job is to communicate and control mental and physical activities and acts as a homeostatic organ, meaning it keeps our constant internal environment. It regulates our heartbeat. It does all those things. And obviously, the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves are the main component of the nervous system. This is really sort of an electrical system because it does work on electrical impulses. So it's kind of our power grid, and it's where everything sort of connects, and it really integrates with all the systems. And if you haven't figured this out already, the circulatory system integrates with every system because every system is made of cells, and cells need the nutrients, and we get nutrients from the circulatory system. The nervous system also integrates with every system. So this is one of those things where not only do systems are part of each other, they also work together, right? They're integrated. Now, the nervous system obviously includes the brain. Okay, the brain is here. If you don't know where your brain is, you're probably in a little trouble. All right, and then we have the spinal cord, and you notice the spinal cord has these little nerves that run off from it. And so basically this is the system that connects to the brain. So we have signals coming in and we have signals going out. So the brain can send a signal out for us to do something, but the brain can also receive signals in from these nerves and interpret that information as something important. And of course, another good point to talk about how systems integrate is because the nervous system is so fragile, it's made of nerve tissue, it has to be protected. So your spinal cord actually runs up your vertebrae. So this is a vertebrae, it's part of the skeletal system, it's a muscle, right? It provides support, but it also provides protection so that when the spinal cord runs up through it, it's not exposed to the outside, it's not really superficial, so it's really protected pretty well by these systems. All right, so the skeletal system protects the nervous system. All right, moving on to the endocrine system. Now, the endocrine system is kind of like the nervous system, except instead of sending electrical impulses, it sends chemical messages, primarily hormones or enzymes that make the body do what it needs to do. Now, this includes glands. It does include the pancreas. It includes the ovaries, the testes, and the hormones themselves. So the endocrine system really does the chemical messaging, whereas the nervous system does the electrical messages. And there are some exceptions to this rule, but here's an easy way to remember. The nervous system generally controls day-to-day or even second-to-second action within the body. It is what controls our responses, it's what controls how I'm talking, that sort of thing. The endocrine system can really control long-term processes. So the endocrine system is responsible for, say, determining when you go into puberty or when a female ovulates. Right? These are long-term patterns where the hormones trigger certain reactions in the body. Some of these reactions can happen relatively quickly, but on the whole, the very quick, the very day-to-day or minute-to-minute responses are nervous system controlled, but the long-term developmental things can in large part be controlled by the endocrine system and the glands that make it up. All right, that takes us to the reproductive system, and as I mentioned earlier, this is sort of the odd man out because there really are two systems to look at because you have the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system, right? The male reproductive system is responsible for producing and storing and distributing gametes. Now, obviously, both of them do that, but we're talking about different gametes. The male reproductive system is going to produce sperm. It's going to distribute it by providing it to the female reproductive tract. The female reproductive system is going to produce gametes, but it's going to release those gametes for the purposes of fertilization. In the male, the components are obviously the testis, the penis, and the sperm itself, where in the female, the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, or the oviducts, as they're sometimes called, the uterus, the vagina, and the eggs themselves are all part of the reproductive system. Now, there is one other note here, and we're going to get into this when we talk about the reproductive system in more detail, and that is the female reproductive system has an additional job, and that is to gestate offspring, that is, to take care of it until it's ready to be born. That's not something that the male reproductive system has to worry with. Okay, so the female reproductive system not only has to produce the gametes and provide for their fertilization, but if fertilization occurs, the female reproductive system now goes into daycare mode, so to speak, in that it allows the offspring to develop inside and will ultimately give birth to the offspring like we saw from Shirike, which I now cannot find. Oh, there it is. Wee little baby. It's a baby. Tiny. All right. So that is our overview of the systems. You can tell that this is actually a pretty big puzzle, and the pieces have to go together right. If they don't go together right, they just don't work. So understanding not only the pieces and what they do, but where they go is obviously critical. We're going to get into more detail on how those all work. But you can see that the human body is pretty complex. There's all kinds of stuff, and it integrates, and you got little tubes and little nerves and all that stuff. It's pretty cool, but you need to know how it works, and you need to know what those systems do. But ultimately, what we need to understand is each system is made up of components. Those components do certain jobs, and sometimes those components even integrate with other systems to make sure those systems can do their job. All right, so let's go ahead and review our final objectives. First of all, list the major body organ systems. Well, you've got the muscular system, you've got the skeletal system, you've got the integumentary system. Then we go into things like the circulatory, respiratory, digestive, excretory, nervous, and endocrine system, each having their own structures within them. The job of the circulatory system is to send materials to the body, namely oxygen and food. The respiratory system's job is to exchange gases with the atmosphere and the bloodstream. Digestive system's job is to break down food into little parts that can be absorbed. Excretory system is to take that stuff that we absorbed after it's been used, get rid of the waste that it makes. The nervous system is to control our body's working. The endocrine system is the chemical messages that control how we develop. And the reproductive system ultimately provides more of us, so to speak. All right? The major organs within the organ systems, obviously, the skeletal system is made up of bones and ligaments and cartilage. The muscular system is made up primarily of muscles and tendons. The integumentary system has a variety of different features, including the skin, hair, nails, horns, for those of you who have them. If you do, that's kind of cool. But it also includes our nose, our mouth, our ears, things like that. The circulatory system obviously includes the blood vessels and the heart, and also works with the lymphatic system, which uses basically the same vessels to control our body's fluid regulation. The respiratory system's job, or the components, that make up the respiratory system are the lungs, and of course the blood vessels that exchange. Well, wait a minute, blood vessels are part of the circulatory system, right? Yeah, but how else are you going to get the oxygen around there, right? So the blood vessels are part of multiple systems because they have multiple jobs, not only to circulate blood, but also to circulate gases. Digestive system includes the stomach, the intestines, and the organs that are associated with them, like the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder, and stuff like that. The excretory system includes not only the kidneys and bladder, which we generally think of, but it also includes the anus, because that's one place we get rid of waste. It also includes our skin, because we can get rid of waste that way as well. The nervous system deals with nerves, the spinal cord, and of course the big boy, brain. And of course the endocrine system is made up of primarily glands, which include things like the ovary and the testes, but also the adrenal gland and the pituitary gland and the thymus, or the thymus gland and whatnot. And then finally the reproductive system, which actually there are two. There's the male reproductive system, which consists of the penis, the testes, and the sperm. And you have the female reproductive system, which encompasses the ovaries, the oviducts or fallopian tubes, the uterus, the vagina, and of course the eggs that are used for reproduction. Finally, we're going to look at the general anatomical location of these organs. All right, so in review, we are going to look at, of course, the brain is up here toward the top. We've got the nose and the mouth, of course, and then the nose and the mouth actually integrate with two systems. We've got the trachea for the respiratory system. We've got the esophagus for the digestive system. And, of course, if we continue with the respiratory system, we have the lungs here and here. Okay, but I got to put my heart in here too. So there goes the heart and my other lung. Voila. All right, and then of course we've got to get our other innards in here. So we have the reproductive system, which is pretty inferior. It's way down here at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to put that back into place. Here we go. Putting together the whole human puzzle. All right. Voila. All right. We've got our little large intestine here. We've got, this is called the mesentery. It's kind of the membrane that holds everything together. And of course, I've got my small intestines here. Voila. My large intestine It's also called the colon. It's got 4 parts. It's got the ascending colon, the transverse colon, which I'm putting here, the descending colon, and the sigmoid colon, which leads to the anus. That's where stuff gets out. Of course, I have my stomach, which goes in right here, right? And then, of course, I've got my liver, and we're back together in one pretty piece. All right? When you think about organ systems, you think about individual organs, you think about, oh, I know what the heart does. Okay? It's really complicated, and it really interacts with a whole bunch of different things. So when you know the organ systems, you got to map the human body. You can figure out where things go, what's happening, and all this, okay? So don't think of it as this gushy, ooey, gutsy mess. Think of it as an incredibly complex machine that makes up what you are. All right? We'll have more lectures. We'll take each system individually coming up, but that's sort of your overview. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've learned a lot. I'll see you later. Now, I'm going to hang out with my friend here, and we're just going to, get some dinner? Let's get some dinner. Let's put that digestive system to work.